Okay, so basically today we're going to discuss about the use case is going to be online review classification. So what do we mean by that? So let's say you're a product and you have basically a Twitter handle, you're following a Twitter handle, and then people keep posting good things and bad things about you, right? So what we want to see is that we want to scan these tweets in real time and make some sort of sentiment analysis from that so that we are able to respond in real time. Let's say somebody, suddenly there is some event happens, people are talking bad things about the company, okay? So as a company, we can quickly respond if we have, basically review classification. This applies for tweets, this applies for various other things, but essentially the idea is, can we do real-time text classification and produce results at real time? This is the problem statement, right? Now, this is basically this is the what we call as the architecture for basically how we can go about doing this. Just give me 1 second. Just remove this. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to throw a lot of terms here. All right. And then you'll want to sort of, if you have any questions about it, please feel free to ask me about that, right? But there are few terms and few functionalities that we're going to talk about it, right? So the high-level architecture of how we're going to implement this is the following, right? So let's say we're implementing an Amazon AWS, right? So on AWS, you have a service called Amazon Kinesis Firehose, right? What it essentially does is basically it is a streaming service that can suck up huge amounts of data, right? And can do streaming processing. So what we mean by that is it can take the data, put it into a data storage service like S3, or it can push into further downstreaming services. So essentially, once you get the data, right, there are two types of data, as you know. The first type is batch processing, which we have all very used to, like we write SQL queries, we're used to that, right? Whereas when it comes to real event-driven architectures that people are increasingly building upon, you want something like this. So that's where the whole concept of streaming services come about. And tools like Kinesis, Firehose are very well architected for that. So going back to the point, right? So essentially, the data comes, hits the Kinesis Firehose, then goes to S3, right? On one side. On the other side, you can have a Amazon Sagemaker endpoint, which once we send data, it's supposed to send back the review, right? So for example, let's say you say, hey, how does it work? Or this product is great or something, then you're gonna get a score out of that, right? So this is typically a text classification problem, which you've all solved, right? Like if you're an ML, you've kind of seen how this works and all that. So this happens in pretty much near real time, right? So as soon as the data gets, within few milliseconds, we're able to give a prediction. And that prediction, along with this data, is going to be sent to further downstream processing applications. For example, we want to store that in a different S3 bucket. Then maybe there is a data analytics application. They do some sort of windowing over that. We can take an average score for like a minute of all the tweets that happen in that minute, et cetera, et cetera. So and then make a dashboard out of it, right? So let's just say, suddenly for the last 1 hour you're getting pretty bad reviews, right? So then you can you can send an alert through anomaly detection, and then you can send an alert to your management, right? Let's say it could be through an email, through SMS, whatnot. So Amazon has a suite of services for all of these functionalities, right? We talked about Kinesis Storehouse is basically it's a ingest and store messaging architecture. Then we have SagePoint, then we have data analytics, then we have Cloudwatch, which basically logs all the data that we are getting through Amazon Kinesis, right? So all of that, we will see one by one different applications and how we can go about that, right? There's another piece that is very important, which is not depicted here, which is basically something called as Lambda. Okay, how many of you have heard of this Lambda? Hello, anybody heard of Lambda? Lambda function? No? I think we have Sadaf, right? Hey, Sadaf, have you heard of Lambda?
And that is from the Python, right?
No, not from Python. There's an application called Lambda, or there's a feature in AWS called Lambda. Okay, so essentially, what it does is it's a lightweight processing platform. So it's an extremely lightweight, flexible processing platform that enables you to do a small, enables to run a small function, but if very efficiently at very high scale, basically. Okay, so it's something that modern production ready systems use these days. So essentially, uh, Lambda is something that you can insert in any of the steps, and you can write a function and say, do this for me, right? So like for example, in Python, you do all sorts of functions, right? You take data and you write a function around it. And you'll say, I want something or whatever, right? The same thing can be done using Lambda, okay? That's what Lambda is about. So let's start with that, okay? So Lambda is basically a processing layer that you can use to do whatever you want. For example, uh, you know, as a part of this architecture, we could have many things, many functionalities, right? So, for example, invoking Sagemaker endpoint is one functionality. Then taking this data and calling Cloudwatch or SNS to trigger a push notification. That's another functionality. Similarly, we can have multiple functionalities that we can achieve through Lambda, basically, right? Now, let's just go through the code, okay? So this is a piece of code that enables whatever we've discussed here. So there's something called as the Kinesis data stream. I hope you guys can see my laptop, right? So you can see the screen. Can somebody confirm whether they can see the code?
Yeah, we are able to see that.
Okay, great. So basically, this is the piece of code that you will start. Will start the Kinesis data stream, right? And it starts. There's an input stream. Then there's a processing layer, and after the processing is done, then we invoke the SageMaker endpoint. Then we go about doing further things, like we've shown the architecture in the first diagram, right? This is all the code that we have run. Basically for doing different use cases out there. I'm not going to go into the entire code, but I'm just going to focus more on the Lambda functionality and why, what is the use case of it? What are the interesting things that we can learn about Lambda? Primarily because I spent a lot of time on that, learned a lot of things, all right? And apart from that, while learning Lambda, we're also going to learn a lot of other useful functionalities that are very useful for you. Uh, whether you want to be a data scientist, or data engineer, or simple Amazon cloud engineer, right? Whatever you want to be, these are all the functionalities you need to really know. Okay, most of them are going to be used in real life, day in day out. So you better kind of understand what the use cases are. All right. So please pay attention to whatever functionalities and functions I'm talking about. And if you have any questions, please feel free to raise in this session. Okay. So like we discussed, basically starts with Amazon Kinesis 5 hosts. Then the data goes to we can actually over here we just say we can do anything else also. So we can do a data analytics application. We can do some averaging on that, but because it's text, you can't do averaging. So you have to convert. You have to use SageMaker endpoint to get a prediction for that, right? This is more for general, but that particular use case is not for this. Now, what is this Lambda about that we're going to talk about? And we're going to discuss a little bit more on Lambda, like I said, right? Let's just go to the Lambda function creation here. We'll go to this. Here it's just about Lambda itself, right? So just give me 1 second, guys. Yeah. Okay. So basically, we'll start with an introduction of Lambda. Okay. So we as you have seen, I told you that Lambda is basically a lightweight function processing feature or functionality that AWS provides, and it scales very effectively. What that means is that if you suddenly there's a lot of data that comes, you don't have to do any more provisioning of resources. Okay, it just goes up based on the data, incoming data, right? So that's how it works, and it can slow down very quickly also. So if there's no data, nothing, it'll just shut down itself and keep quiet. And the moment additional data comes, it will go back again. That's the main functionality of the Lambda, right? Now we're going to see exactly what I mean by that. So hopefully you'll get an idea of what Lambda is, etc. So Lambda is, like I said, is just a functionality that Amazon SageMaker provides. They come with you can put a simple Python, let's say 3.9 or whatever application. On top of that, you will put one function. Like here, the function is something, right? The function says, basically, we're going to take data that comes from the kinesis or whatever. We're going to make a prediction. This is a small function that we have written. Okay. Now this function, along with the Python 3.8 or whatever we define, it is going to create a small container. Basically, it creates a very small container. Okay. I hope you guys know what containers are, right? Okay, so what we are doing essentially here is that we have a runtime of from Python 3.9. Then we have a small functionality that we have written, combining with that. Okay, this is all. This is the whole Lambda thing. Okay, now this is a small container that sits on AWS and gets invoked whenever there's data that comes. All right. Now, apart from this, there is something called layers. Okay, so essentially layers are additional functionality on top of this main function that you can write, okay? And that basically you can put some libraries. So in this particular case, what happened was we are putting a SageMaker Python library. All right. So basically, we have Python runtime, then we have SageMaker libraries that we are putting in the layer, and we're just writing a functionality on Lambda. This is what, now you might say, hey, why are we making this basically so complicated or whatever? No, the answer is it's not complicated, it's modularity. Okay, so you have a runtime separately, you want to put some additional libraries, you do that, and then you have a function, and then Lambda combines all of the three and then gives you an endpoint. That is what is the use case here. So it's like containerization, but more simpler to deal with. Okay. Now, so as I was doing this, as I was writing the code and everything, I was basically getting a lot of. There was one hiccup I had. Okay, and the hiccup was that when I zip the code and we want to. Oh, this is Cloudwatch, right? Just give me 1 second, guys. I think this is the one. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is the one, Okay, so I was getting a lot of errors, right? So I spent almost 2-3 days on this. So one of the error I got was, check this out, right? What was it saying? You can't have, for a given Lambda, you can't have the Lambda size libraries, all the libraries combined to be greater than 50 MB. Okay, because Lambda is such a lightweight application architecture, they have put this limit of 50 MB. But then I needed SageMaker libraries to go along with it. So how do you solve that? Okay, I hope you guys are with me, right? So Lambda is useful for invoking very quick small functionalities. But in this particular case, we needed that SageMaker libraries. But if I'm putting SageMaker libraries, it's crossing 50. Okay, now I could basically give up and just use a normal container. But I wanted to see if there's any other alternatives that we can go ahead and still use Lambda. So the key here is we have to use Lambda, but we've hit a roadblock in terms of the size limit. Okay, so thankfully there is a alternate solution. Okay, so the alternate solution is basically you can actually create an image. You can create a Docker image with all the libraries you want, and as long as it is within 250 MB, you are going to be able to basically use it as a Lambda function. Okay. Now, so to do that, it took me a lot of effort to kind of, I did a lot of breaking around, a lot of trying, and finally I found out that this is a possibility. Okay. Now that is a great possibility because we get to do our own containerization. We can create our own Docker images and all that, right? So let's go ahead and check out how that has happened. Okay. Now I'm going to throw in another term called Cloud9. How many have heard of this Cloud9 service on AWS? Okay. So basically, Cloud9 is like your PyCharm. So how many Python developers do we have here in the session? Any Python developers we have? Hey guys, you have to make it slightly interactive. Please respond if you are a Python developer. Okay, so Sai Teja said yes, right? So you're a Python developer, so you must have used PyCharm, right? So you've used PyCharm or something else, right?
It is, I mean, IDE for developing Python applications. Yeah.
Correct. Now, if you're using an offline IDE on your laptop, there is obviously pros and cons. The pro is that it's kind of fast and whatnot, right? But the con is you have to all the time check in into Gate. If you want to connect with the container on AWS, there's a little bit of setup involved, etc. And maybe suddenly internet is gone and whatnot, right? So instead of that, now Amazon has come up with an IDE of their own, which is basically called as Cloud9. It's an IDE that sits on Amazon services, right? So which means you can put your Python code, you can run a whole bunch of things, and it'll all happen online. So even if your laptop crashes, it's not a problem, and it connects seamlessly with other AWS services. So that's the main advantage, I would say. The main advantage is it connects seamlessly with other AWS services. All right, that's the main advantage. Now, like I told you that I've tried multiple things to use the Lambda, but I was hitting the size limit. Now I understood online that there is a way to go about it, which is as long as you're using an image, right? So then you're able to put that. I'll show you what all I've done. Okay, I'm not kidding there. So let me show you the layers. Okay, so yeah, so there is something called layers. I told you, right? So I've done like 9 different layers, guys. So I've tried again. See all this? So I've tried multiple times to shrink the size, but it wasn't doing that because the Sagemaker functionality libraries were so large that we couldn't do that, right? So the alternative was basically going up with the containerization and images. Okay. Now going back to that Cloud9, so you can see an app file, the same file that we have used in the Lambda. Remember, this is the same file. Now what we're doing is we're putting this front end Python app file. Along with that, we have a Docker, and we're going to create a Docker image basically. So you just read this. So we are pulling in Python 3.8. Then we are copying the app.py into the Lambda task root, and then we have requirements file, and then we are basically creating an image from those requirements. So so the requirements here are simply we want a SageMaker, NumPy, and Boto3. Okay, basically as I told you, SageMaker is important for making an inference here. Okay, now so once I run this, right? So you're going to create a Docker image basically. Yeah, go ahead. Any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah. So see, like normally we create a virtual environment for dependencies, right? So instead of that, you are, I mean, compressing them in a image file and you are trying to import from the image file. Am I right? Or is it different? I mean, the dependencies.
Yeah, the dependencies are all there, right? So they depend where are the dependencies listed. It's in a requirement file. So it's the same thing. It's nothing new. So the
Oh,
dependencies are all here, and we have a Docker file. We're using a Docker file to build a Docker image, right?
okay.
And then we are pushing the Docker image to the registry, which is called Elastic Container Registry on Amazon, right? So just like you have Docker image registry, this is a private service for our user base, right? For the company. So if you're working for a client, this will be a private repo for that client. So these images will not be visible to outside world, right? Now so if you go in here and you want to push that image to the container registry, all you have to go is click on this wave push commands and see a whole bunch of steps. So the first step is you have to log in, right? You have to make a connection between your development environment and the ECR. All you have to do is just press this, and it will get connected automatically. So the login has succeeded. Now I've already created the latest image using this command, right? Now I'm going to tag it. I'm going to tag it with this. Okay. I'm going to say something, right? 15. Okay. Now that is tagging is done. All I have to do is now push it. Okay. Now once I push this, you're going to see a new image here. Okay. So we have a new image called 15, right? Now we're going to take this image and use it in a new Lambda function, not the old one, because the old one had layers and all that, which was throttling our size, right? So we're going to go on the new one. It's already done by the see here. So basically here Lambda has this application. So the previous image is 13. We can actually deploy the new image, which is basically 15. So once I click this, it's the new image gets deployed onto the endpoint of Lambda. All right. Now, I was getting a lot of errors, right? While I was, running the other function, right? This function, if I run this, there's an easy way of running this also, guys. So just go to test and say, hey, test this, okay? And you're getting a lot of errors, right? Now, if you want to go in deep and understand the errors, there's an easy way of doing it. It's basically via, what is this? Can somebody tell me? Cloudwatch, right? So Cloudwatch is essentially a unified service for all the logs from all the applications that you have on AWS, right? So all the logs get sent to Cloudwatch, and you can see those logs right there, and then you can see what is the issue you're facing, etc. And then you can dig deep, okay? And then you can dig deep and see what is going on, right? That's very important. So as you can see here, so it's saying I'm unable to invoke the SM endpoint from Fantasys, right? This is because we deployed Sagemaker, but it wasn't working properly, right? So they spent a lot of time on this. Now we're going with the other option, which is basically deploying an image directly, okay? And so here the function code will not be visible because it is coming as a image from Cloud ECR itself. So it's not going to display that function separately, but that's all you need to know. Okay. Now there's no separate configuration, everything, because it's already all in the image itself, except there's one thing you have to mention, which is basically endpoint. Okay. So the SageMaker endpoint is something you have to mention. Okay. So once you mention that, it's basically everything else comes through the image itself. Now you can just go ahead and test this. Okay. So I've already done this. You don't have to worry too much. So just the moment I hit this, you're going to get, hopefully, it takes a little bit time in the first time because it is warming up the image. Okay. So yeah, we've succeeded. We've got labels of 515. That's and 5151. Okay. So let's check the text here. So the first text review says, I love this product, hate the product, great job. This sucks, I hate it, right? We can clearly see that this is a positive one, we got 5, this is a negative one, we got 1. Again is a positive one, this is a negative one, right? So the prediction is pretty good. Okay. Let's just go and change this and say average. Let's see what happens once we basically change the review. Okay, let's see if the results come differently. Now, okay, there's a bit of warm up. I have to try multiple times. Okay, it's coming 5151. So the third one is I think we have to write slightly longer. And let's see now. Okay. Okay, yeah, so I've changed this. Now the labels predictions have gone down, right? So 5111. Let's look at the text. Yeah, the first one is good, the second one is bad, third one is bad, fourth one is also bad. That's why the results. So it's working fine, right? This is the magic of machine learning, right? And this is coming through the Sagemaker endpoint. Now let's go check out what Sagemaker endpoint is. Okay, we've checked out Lambda, we checked out ECR, we checked out Cloudwatch. We'll check out the Sagemaker endpoint. Okay, give me 1 second. Yeah, this is the Sagemaker endpoint, guys. How did so basically, we will do a separate session on SageMaker, but essentially, endpoint is something that has a model behind it. Okay, this particular endpoint that I've created has a model behind it, and it is serving that model in real time. Right, that's what it is doing. Okay, and as you get instantiated, you can see this here. So if I call this, utilization goes up. All right. So you can see various things here, endpoint configurations, ARNs, various tags that are given. All of these details here are shown in the endpoint itself, right? So you can have various invocation metrics, instance metrics. All of this is very exciting, to be honest with you, right? So it's showing us all of this data, all of this information, so you don't make a mistake. So that is the important thing about, or great thing about using a SageMaker and AWS product, right? There's visibility, complete visibility into all the applications, so that you don't make stupid mistakes and silly mistakes. That's the whole point, right? So we have seen this. This is the endpoint that we are triggering from our Lambda function, okay? And this has code that gives you that gives you the results, right? Now the next option is we can take these results and send it to a basically further downstream processing, right? Using kinesis. Okay. Now that's one optionality. Before that, what I've done is it's usually recommended that you use an API gateway. Okay. So if you use an API gateway, there are some advantages of using an API gateway. One advantage is that you can put various checks on the incoming traffic. So let's say somebody wants to abuse your endpoint, okay, and then they just put a lot of image, right? Like instead of 100 KB, they just dump like a 1 GB image file. That will choke up your processing and cost you a lot, right? So if you don't want that, API gateways are a great way of managing your endpoints, right? So ultimately, whether it's a SageMaker endpoint or a different endpoint, it's an endpoint that we use in our day-to-day developments, right? So SageMaker, the gateway is a great way of ensuring you can put different mesh, filters, blacklist, whitelist, and whatnot, right? So you do all of that. This is one nice place of doing that, which is basically the API gateway. Now we've already set up the the endpoints and everything. So it's already, so you can see this. So it's once I put some test data, it's going to trigger this, which is going to trigger the Lambda, and it is finally going to hit the Lambda endpoint, which is hitting the SageMaker, right? You remember that, right? So and then and you also get the response back. And that's how this is a more what do I say? This is a more professional way of doing it. The testing that we've done here directly is not recommended. It's more for like for just testing it out, right? This is a production level stuff. Okay, so I hit this. Let's see if it works. Okay, we got the results, right? So we got 5, 1, and 1. Same thing. So essentially, this is how we want to do it. Now we can also set up anything else. So for example, so you want to use like a API gateway as much as possible whenever there's an endpoint involved, so that you're able to control all of the things, exposure, blacklisting, whitelisting, and whatnot, right? Security, everything is integrated into the API gateway. Okay. Now we've covered the API gateways. The other important thing is 1 second. Yeah, the other important thing is IAM. Okay. So what is IAM? Basically, IAM is a service that is integral to pretty much every other service on AWS. Okay. So, and the use case of IAM is it manages the access, right? So identity and access management, in the sense that who can do what, right? So for example, let's say as a developer, you are only eligible to create, let's say create an endpoint. You can only read a certain DB, right? But you can't create the DBs or edit the DBs. That should not be given to you. So there's a very granular permissions that are possible through the IAM roles and users and policies, right? Let's check out one of the roles for our Lambdas. So this is our Lambda. You can see that there is a policy here. Okay, in this policy, we mentioned few things. Okay, and those things need to be mentioned, otherwise you will not be able to use the processing services. Okay, now this is how, basically you can define a role, access control for your Lambda. Okay, now typically this is done by administrators. So if you're a developer, you would not be able to do this. The administrator will do this. I'm sitting on an administrator account, so I'm able to do all of that, right? So there's a visual editor and there's JSON. In the visual editor, once you can see what all accesses you have for this particular role. All right. Now, what is the access I have for this? I can invoke a Lambda. I can send data to Cloudwatch. I can also trigger SNS jobs. I'm also write logs to Cloudwatch logs. On Sagemaker, I have a option of invoking endpoint. If I didn't have this, I wouldn't be able to call that endpoint, right? That's the whole point. And then again, Cloudwatch logs. So everything is, these are the simple, basically roles I have that I can do various things that I need to do, right? From a Lambda point of view, that functionality has this. So if I'm using that, I'm able to, basically get all these accesses. All right, that's kind of the thing. Just give me 1 minute. I'm going to check other functionalities that are important for us. All right. Okay. Any questions so far, guys? Okay, so now we have talked about many different functions, right, as a part of our architecture. The only remaining pieces are basically the ones that are regarding, Kinesis file host and Kinesis data stream, right? Those things we'll cover in our next session because it deserves its own session. It's kind of complicated to understand the nuances of that, but this is more like a affiliate services as a part of, if you want to set up a production ready streaming service which can do classification of text, right, in real time. You've seen that the actual code for running that functionality is very simple. It's just a one small SageMaker endpoint. It's just one piece in the puzzle, right? But you need to put so many other things like Kinesis Firehouse in the beginning. You need to have Lambda. You need to have an ECR set up. A whole bunch of other things that need to be set up for you to do a end-to-end processing job. Okay, so writing an ML code is just one part of it, but you need to have all these other pieces in the puzzle to make it production ready. So what we're going to do in the next session is we're going to explore Kinesis. We're going to explore SNS as well. So you'll see once somebody sends a message, if there's a bad message that comes, you'll get an email and all that. So you'll see all of that in the next coming sessions. Okay. So with that said, yeah, so I'm done for the session today. Any further questions from anyone?
Yeah, so like few services are like restricted to a few specific regions, right? So for example, when you take Amazon SNS service, so when I tried with Indian service, I mean Indian region, it did not work. So will this, setup or will this architecture, will that region impact this setup or these services?
Yeah, of course, of course. So see, not sure what is the restriction on your particular region and service, right? But obviously the restrictions are there. So let's say a service is not available in a particular region, it's not available then until it's rolled out to all the regions, you have to wait, right? So the alternative is you can use a service that is unrestricted in a region. So for example, if your client, you can ask to a client and say, hey, SNS is somehow restricted in India. So I want like a SNS from US East 2 or something like that, right? That way you're able to get around that restriction. Now, sometimes as per the roles, usually, you're able to mix and match services between different regions also in case of that, right? But that's not recommended because then there'll be a lot of network traffic that has to go to different regions. Usually recommended to keep all your services in one region as much as possible.